Okay, might as well get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Troy Baxter, and before we get started, give you a little background on myself. In November, I will have been with MasterControl for 9 years. Been around a long time. Started out in the tech support department, and back in the day, we were rolling out the first version of MasterControl process module. Back then, it was called Forms, and the forms were in PDF. And I just sort of, whenever the phones weren't ringing, kind of spent my time playing around with forms and sort of became the tech support form expert at the time. And that led to a transition into the professional services department. So currently work on the team that helps you scope and build your process forms. I guess I'm an expert in the QEM, the solution packages, your CAPA, complaint, nonconformance, deviation, those kind of forms. So I've worked with many of you. Some of you, I do see some new faces in here. And in those days, there was just me and Lance. I don't know if any of you know Lance. It was just a 2-member team. We're now up to 8 people as part of the process team. It's a vastly growing part of our business. Since those quality event processes are so important in your organization. So we're excited about the progress that we've made and hopefully make a lot more progress. We're going to be revamping the solution packages in the next little while. So look for that. All right, so today's presentation is on jQuery. It's called the Write More, Do Less JavaScript Library. Before we get started, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Just raise your hand. How many of you have built an HTML form for use within MasterControl? Okay.
We're not live yet, so
okay.
I can't claim.
How many of you have experience with JavaScript? Okay, that's good. How many of you have experience with jQuery? Okay, for those of you who have experience with jQuery, some of this may be a review. We're starting at the basics and sprinkling in some of the essentials for making it work within MasterControl. Okay. So what is jQuery? Basically, it's a lightweight JavaScript library. And when we say library, these are JavaScript files that you can store on your server, and then using certain commands, access that library and do certain things. So JavaScript works great. For those of you who've used it, using jQuery doesn't mean that JavaScript necessarily goes away. It's a more efficient way of using JavaScript. And commands that take multiple lines of code in JavaScript sometimes take 1 or 2 lines in jQuery. And that's why we like to use it. Okay. The jQuery library contains these following features. HTML DOM manipulation. For those of you who aren't super technical, what DOM is, that basically refers to the fields and things on our form. CSS manipulation, that has more to do with layout and the way your form looks. HTML event methods, we'll talk a little bit about that. Effects and animation, you can do some really cool stuff with jQuery. For our purposes here in our quality processes, we don't have to do a lot of that, so we don't spend a lot of time on that, but if you want to study that on your own, you're welcome to. Ajax, which helps us interact with databases and other things, and then there's some utilities. So we're not going to go through this entire list. We're going to I sort of cherry pick the things that we do a lot with the forms that we build and that will probably help you. So why jQuery? There are a lot of JavaScript frameworks out there, but jQuery seems to be the most popular. It's got a big presence out there on the web. It's very popular. And some of the biggest companies in the world use it: Google, Microsoft, IBM, Netflix. Okay, so adding jQuery to your MC HTML forms. Okay, there are 2 ways to start using jQuery. One is you can download the jQuery library from jQuery.com. Again, it's a set of files basically. You'll download those and then upload those into your file library. If you've used that in the process module, the file library is a place inside MasterControl where you can store external files and your HTML forms can reference it. Okay. The second is you can include jQuery from a CDN like Google. I'm going to talk about that here in a couple of more slides, so bear with me. Okay, so downloading jQuery, as I mentioned, very easy. There are 2 versions of the jQuery library that you can download. There is a production version. This would be used for your live website. Basically what they've done is they've taken all the commands necessary and put it into as small a package as possible so that you don't have to have large files and things on your site. There's also a development version, and this is for testing and development. It's the same as the production version, but it includes all documentation. It's for the nerds among us, okay? If you're not super nerdy, you probably would never dive into this and get your hands dirty, but if you like that kind of stuff, that's available. Okay, as I mentioned, both versions can be downloaded from jQuery.com. Another thing to talk about here, I don't have this on the slide, but there are many versions of jQuery. They're constantly updating it. You'll want to look at the documentation on jQuery.com. Certain functions and features get deprecated, meaning that they don't use them anymore. They outline versions of browsers that things are compatible with and whatnot. So you want to pay special attention to that. Okay, so that's downloading. Okay, so the next piece is jQuery library is a single JavaScript file, and you reference it within your HTML file. So my presentation here is sprinkled with HTML and jQuery examples, so if you are familiar with that stuff, this should look familiar. So basically what you're going to do is, this is how, once you have your jQuery library uploaded to your file library in MasterControl, you have to reference it. Okay? Now this is actually if you were testing your form outside of MasterControl. I don't know if those of you with experience building forms, you probably know the pain involved in putting your template into MasterControl and then revving it over and over and over again until you get it right. I mean, I do this for a living and I run into that problem. So there is a way to point to the jQuery library that's just sitting on your computer while you're doing some testing before putting it into MasterControl. So the important part here is the source attribute, we call that, source equals, and then if this is located on your computer, that would be the path to the file. And if the jQuery library is located in the same folder as your HTML file, that, what I have on the screen, will work. But if it's in some other folder, you need to put the path to that folder, whatever it is. Okay, now this is when you put it into MasterControl. Pretty much the same code. The difference here is the source. We're using a MasterControl keyword. Hopefully most of you are familiar with what that is. MasterControl.javascript, which then points to your file library, and then, again, the name of the file. Okay, question?
Will your presentation be on the website afterwards?
Yes, it will. And after you've seen my presentation, I haven't been asked to do this, but I thought it might be a good idea. We teach Monday and Friday classes. We do an HTML class. We do a JavaScript class. I'd like to get an idea if there's enough interest to do a jQuery class as part of the Monday and Friday. Maybe we can see about offering that next year if there's demand for it. So, okay. Alternatives to downloading. So if you don't want to download and host the jQuery yourself, you can link directly to the jQuery library through what's called a content delivery network. Google and Microsoft have them. And basically the difference is that your source, instead of pointing to a local file, you're pointing to a URL that points to a specific version of the library. And you can get this from jQuery.com as well. Now, the nice part about this is that you don't really have to worry about having a file downloaded and in your file library. There are some disadvantages, though. This requires an internet connection. Okay? So if you have sort of a strict policy at your office, or and honestly, I point, this is an option, but I think I remember a customer fairly recently where their internet connection went down, but their local network was still up. So if your internet connection goes down, your form stops working. But if you have it downloaded locally and in the MasterControl library, if your internal LAN is still up and running, you're good. So there are some pluses and minuses to going with one way or the other.
Do you see a performance hit when you go to the hosted version?
Not really. Have you, Michael?
No, they utilize caching, so if you visited any site that downloads jQuery before, they'll just hit your cache, your local browser's cache. Yeah.
So there's the links to both the Microsoft and Google version of the library out on the CDNs. Okay, so those are your two options. Honestly, I think I'd probably go with having it local, just again because if you were to, lose your internet connection, you're kind of in trouble going with this method. But it's up to you. Okay, so jQuery syntax. Let's talk a little bit about how we use jQuery within our forms. Okay, so it's made for selecting HTML elements and then performing some sort of action. So your basic jQuery syntax is, what you do is call a dollar sign, okay, and then a selector, and a selector is, think of it as pointing to a certain object within your form, whether that's a field or a div or a span, something like that, and then an action. And then there's lots and lots of actions. There's clicking, there's hovering, basically, typing into a field, lots and lots of actions. We don't have time to go over all of them here, but you get the idea. Okay? Now, if you're familiar with CSS at all, using jQuery will come pretty easy to you because it's the same kind of situation with selectors. In fact, they kind of stole it from the concept from CSS to make it easy. All right, now, here's some examples. So basically this line of code right here, $ this being, say, a field on our form, .hide. That's all it is. That 12 characters or so would make that field hide. In JavaScript, that takes a little more doing. Not significantly more, but more. $p.hide, okay, hides all P elements. So this is where jQuery gets really powerful. I keep clicking some button that makes me go back. What's going on? Sorry. Okay. Where in this example you're pointing at a very specific field or object. This one, you're pointing at all P elements. So a P tag in HTML, for those who don't know, is a paragraph tag. It creates a new paragraph within your HTML page. If you had, say, let's talk about a real-world example. You may have a section on your form that has 5 P tags on it, and you click some button and you want to hide, oh my goodness. It's like if I shake it. If you want to hide all 5 of those P tags, one line of code will hide all of those instead of writing a separate line or command for each element on your form. Okay? We got one here that's .test.hide. So again, those of you familiar with CSS, you can specify a class in CSS with a dot and then some name you give it. And you can have a class like that. And so any element on your form that has a class of test will also hide. So same kind of example. So the hiding thing, and the reason I chose that for my examples here, that's something that almost everybody wants to do on their forms. They've got some section or some field that they want to hide or unhide as a result of a checkbox or a radio button selection or a drop-down. Okay? And then our last one is you use the # test And what the pound sign test is that's the ID of a given element. So again, if you've built a master control form before, you know that all of your fields, your input tags, your select tags must have an ID, so you can specify a specific field to perform that action. Okay, so in all of these examples, it would take quite a few more lines of code to do all of this than it would with jQuery, and that's why we like jQuery. Okay, warning, master control Quirk, and there are many, as if you've spent any time building forms in master control. Master control core code, the thing that runs your documents module and your training module and all that, actually contains jQuery in it. This causes a problem when we're building forms. And the reason is that the library that's in the master control core code, it's old. It's 1.4.2, and I know that I think they're up to 2.0 point something. So the problem with that is that when if you're trying to run two libraries in one system, there are conflicts. So what we have to do is we have to sort of resolve that conflict. And as we learned in the previous slide, we use the $sign to initiate a jQuery call, but that's going to break essentially because of this conflict. So what you're going to do is you're going to create just a little line here, var JQ, and you can actually, this is just something that we kind of do on the forums team, equals jQuery.noConflict. So now what happens is every time you would normally use a $sign, you're now going to replace that with JQ. Okay? Now, you might think to yourself, well, maybe I'll just use another symbol. I would advise against that, because things like pound signs and other symbols are used a lot inside of code. So that's why we picked JQ, because it's kind of innocuous. But it could be whatever you want. If you like your own initials, if that's your thing, you could do that. But whatever you want. So from this point forward in my slide presentation, I will be using JQ as opposed to $signs in all of my examples. Okay. All right, so the document ready event. This is another great part about jQuery. So with JavaScript, again, for those of you who have experience with JavaScript, when you create a function, and a function is a set of commands that does something on your form, a lot of times you have to tie it to a field. So let's take the radio button example. You can write a function that hides a field when you select yes from your radio buttons, but you have to take the function and attach it to the radio button on what we call an on-click event. So when you click the radio button, it says to JavaScript, do this, if the selection is yes. The great thing about jQuery and this document ready event is you don't have to attach your function to that radio button anymore. By putting on-click equals your function name, you can set it up in such a way, and we'll kind of cover this in the next couple of slides, so that jQuery is sort of listening all the time for you to click on that radio button. So we call that the document ready event, and basically you do JQ document dot ready function, and then you put your lines of code that will actually do the command. Question?
So that's after any event on a form, so you click the radio button or whatever you happen to have you want to interact with, document ready equals trigger is that method returns.
Yeah, so there's, when you put down here, you do have to, there is a linkage between the DOM element and this ready event, right? You have to call going back to the slide before where we do pound field name or the field ID, that is what, so it's listening for that event based on that field, okay? Okay, it's good practice. So the other reason we do this is that And we run into this with JavaScript a lot. I've had problems with this over the years with timing when the form loads, because we've got a lot of stuff going on in our forms. We've got keywords, we've got our own functions that we're building, and we can't always predict when stuff is going to load and in what order. Sometimes we're doing a function that depends on a keyword being filled out before we do it. And if your function fires before there's a value in the keyword, well then your function doesn't really work. So the great part about this document ready event is that it sort of eliminates a lot of those problems with timing. Okay, so let's talk about some jQuery selectors. We saw a few of them. All right, so this is one of the most important parts, and these selectors allow us to manipulate our HTML elements. Okay, jQuery selectors are used to find or select HTML based on their ID, classes, types. We sort of talked about that, and it's based on the CSS selectors we talked about. Okay, so all selectors in jQuery start with the $ and parentheses, but again, remember we're going to use the JQ instead of $. All right, so the element selector. We saw an example of this. This would be all elements. So it's as simple as that, right? JQ, and then put P in quotes, all P elements. So there's all sorts of elements that we put in our forms. There's input tags, select tags, which are drop downs, text areas, multi-line text boxes. But you also, the great thing, for those of you who've been around since the PDF forums, the wonderful thing about HTML is that you can use divs and spans to hide entire sections of the form. Has anybody had a PDF form? I know Vishal has and some others. So back in the PDF days, if you wanted to hide something, we had this kludgy way of doing it where you really are just sort of covering it up. You're not really hiding it. And it leaves this big void in the middle of the page. Well, HTML doesn't do that. So anyway, there's a lot of controlling of these elements that we can do with jQuery. P is just one of those examples. So when a user clicks on a button, all P elements will be hidden. And here's what the script looks like. So again, for those of you who may be new to this may be a little over your head, and I apologize. For those of you who have a little more experience, this will probably make a little more sense. And darn it, I forgot to put the JQ in this particular thing. I should have proofread my slides better. Okay, so we've got document.ready function. Okay, and then under that we've got $ and then button. Okay, so that means now this could be a problem if you do it exactly this way and you have multiple buttons on your form, because this is saying any button. My example only has one button now. Okay, so basically button.click, which is one of the actions that's available to us. Okay, p.hide. Okay, so clicking a button on the form will hide all P tags in our form.
So how it works if you have multiple buttons? How would you do that?
If you have multiple buttons,
Yeah.
so you could do the same thing, but in this case you do use a different selector. You wouldn't use the button selector, you would use the ID selector. So each one of your buttons would have a unique ID, and then you point directly to that. We're going to cover that. And, okay, good. My example came up. So actually I have an example here. Hopefully this works. Okay, good. So here I have a bunch of text. Some of these strings of text have P elements surrounding them. Some of them don't. So in this case, when I click the button, okay, everything that was surrounded by a P tag disappeared. Everything that wasn't stayed. Okay. I didn't code the opposite, so I can't make them come back without reloading the file. Okay. Sorry.
Can you view source?
Yeah. yeah, you guys want to see the, let's see the code on this. In fact, instead of the view source, that was our, let's open it up in Notepad++. Oh, I don't know why I commented out the, no conflict, but, so here we have, here's our HTML. Like I said, some of the text it doesn't have anything surrounding it. Others have the p tags. Okay, and it's essentially the same code that I had on the previous slide. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the ID selector. This one is used when we want to specify a specific field with a specific ID, or I shouldn't say just field, but element. Okay. An ID should be unique within a page, so you should use the ID selector when you want to find that. Now, I was just thinking to myself, there is one exception to this. So when we're talking about fields on your form, the ID should be unique. In fact, that's a MasterControl requirement. If you've ever tried to upload a template with IDs that are the same, you get an error message. You can use the same ID on non-DOM elements. So again, a div. If you've ever done it, for those of you not familiar, what a div is basically it's something that you can put around a section on your form, for example, to create kind of a box or draw a box around those. So everything within that section, it's a container, is a div. So you can have divs on your form with IDs because that information is not stored in the MasterControl database, if that makes any sense. Okay? So again, here we have JQ #test, and that would find the element in our form with a specific ID of test. So our jQuery is actually pretty similar from the previous example. The only difference here is instead of a P, we have #test, which points to a very specific element, and I have an example here, so you can see it in action. Oh boy. Okay, so this text will stay field 1. If I click the button, field 1 goes away. Now, there I had a field plus a label. That's another thing that you sort of have to remember when you're dealing with hiding stuff, is you can hide the field, but if you don't do something to the label, you got a label with nothing next to it. I've seen, newer programmers make that mistake. So what I did, and we'll look at the code on this one. Is I created what's called a span, and I gave that the ID of test, and the span surrounds or brackets both the label, field 1, plus my input tag. Okay? So I can hide both elements with one command because I've got this wrapper around both things, and that's what I'm hiding. Now, this is the important part here, the ID equals test. Okay.
Question. Yes. Can you use wildcard characters?
Yeah. Well, so I don't really get into that. That dives a little deeper, but you can do selectors that sort of let you find possible matches and do kind of wildcards. So yes, that would be something we could cover in a full-day class. Okay, so the .class selector. Okay, anything with a specific class. So again, for those of you who are familiar with CSS, and you've assigned an element to a class, you can then call out with jQuery anything that has that name, that class name. So this is sort of how you can get around. So your IDs have to be unique, but you can then assign the same class to many fields on your form. Okay, and it's very similar to what we've done before, but instead of a #, we do a dot. Okay, code's almost exactly the same as the previous example, except that we're using the dot instead of the pound. And yes, you guessed it, the example is pretty much the same as well. Uh-oh, I got to click the allow block content. And then if we look at our code on that one, so I use the span again, but instead of using an ID equals test, it's class equals test. So again, imagine a form with 15 fields on here, and we've assigned 10 of those fields a class test. Clicking the button or checking yes would make all 10 of those fields disappear. So that's the real power in doing this. With regular JavaScript, to make 10 fields disappear, but at minimum take 10 lines of code, sometimes more. With jQuery, we did the whole thing with 3 or 4 lines. Okay, it's a fairly significant difference. Okay, more examples. Again, we don't have time to cover every possible option, but here's a list of some fairly common examples. JQ star selects everything on your form. Use that judiciously. JQ this selects the current HTML element. P.intro, so you can combine selectors. So we had the P, which is any element or anything that's surrounded by a P tag, but then you may have lots of P's, right, on your form, and you might want to separate those into different sections. Again, think of a kind of a multi-tab form with lots of fields on every tab, and you kind of want to do the same thing on each tab, but you need a way to separate them out. P.intro, so it could be P.section1, P.section2, P.section3, so it's all P elements with the intro class. So we've sort of combined those. P with a colon, and then first would be the first P element that shows up sequentially on your form. And then, of course, some of these others have to do with lists. There's something for href, which is a link. Buttons, anyway, there's a lot of options here. And this is where I would encourage you to kind of do your own research and learn some of these. Okay. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay. I don't see anybody sleeping. That's a good sign at the half-hour mark. All right. jQuery event methods. Okay, so before we were concentrating kind of on the selectors. Now let's talk about once we've pointed at something, how to make it do something. So different users' actions that a form can respond to are called events. Okay, so some of the examples of an event that are very common in what we do: moving a mouse over an element, so they call that hovering. Selecting a radio button, clicking on an element, but it can be anything. There can be entering text into a field, actually tabbing out of a field. There's lots of examples of events. So the term fires is often used with events. So an example, the key press event fires the moment you press a key. So there's actually an event in jQuery where if you actually start to type, that's pressing a key. Okay, here's some more of the common DOM events. So there's clicking, double clicking, mouse enter, so that's when the cursor passes over or into some area. Mouse leave, that's when it leaves. So this is how you accomplish hover in many cases. And things that trip people up all the time on these is they'll do something so that when you enter, but they won't do the opposite when you leave. So something pops up that you meant to go away, it stays unless you code the opposite. Key press, key down. There's submit. We don't really use that too much in MasterControl because we have our own submit button. If you were creating forms just for a website, you'd use that for certain things. Change, focus and blur. So focus is when you enter a field. Blur is when you exit a field. Load, resize. Anyway, so this is a kind of a list of events. We tend to use click, change, mouse enter, mouse leave, focus, and blur quite often. The others, not so much. Okay, so syntax for event methods. In jQuery, most DOM events have an equivalent jQuery method. To assign a click event, you do this. So this should look familiar. We just covered that. Dot click. So if you click on an element that has a p tag, that will then do something. Although that in and of itself doesn't do anything. You have to tell it to do something when you click. Okay, so the event method, or the click method, attaches an event handler. So this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where in JavaScript, to do this, I have to go to the p tag in the HTML code and put on click the name of my function. And if you've got 30 p tags on your HTML form, you have to do that on all 30. The beauty of this is that one line of code is it. You don't have to attach it to all 30. And if you add a brand new p tag to your code, it goes right in, it slips right in. You don't have to go back and attach anything to it. Okay, so we've got an example here. When a click event fires on a p element, hide the current p element. There's my code. There we go. Okay, so jq_p.click, we got our function jq_this.hide. So this is sort of a special thing that helps you call certain. So using this, let's say I've got 5 p tags, p elements on my form. When I click on one of them, I only want the one I clicked on to hide. I don't want all 5 to hide. So that's where the this comes from. Basically, the thing you clicked on passes itself into the function. Okay, so that's how this works. Let's see it in action. So here I have a bunch of text on my form. When I click this p tag, it goes away. And then I click this one, and it goes away. And I click that one, and that goes away. And that's all because again, each one of those passed itself into my function when I clicked on it, using that this identifier. Let's take a look at that, just so you can see the jQuery you've seen, just so you can get an idea of what the HTML looks like. What did I call that? I think that's this one. Yes. Okay. So anything with a p tag around it, when you clicked on it, went away. Okay. Other commonly used jQuery event methods. There was a table of this a couple of slides ago. This just gives you the descriptions of what those things do. The hide and show, and then toggle. Toggle is actually pretty useful in jQuery because, so hide and show do what their names suggest, but what toggle does is it's smart enough to figure out what the current state is. So when you use toggle, it just does the opposite. If something's hidden, it shows it. If it's shown, it hides it. So toggle, pretty cool feature. Okay, so let's talk about jQuery DOM manipulation. So one very important part of jQuery is being able to manipulate those form fields in our forms. And basically, jQuery comes with a bunch of DOM-related methods that are easy to access and manipulate. And DOM equals document object model. Maybe this could have been one of the questions on Jeopardy. Well, it's not quality related. So So basically, these are defined standards for HTML and XML documents, basically. Okay, so there's a couple of things, when we talk about DOM manipulation, there's a couple of things you can do and ways to manipulate. And one is get content. So this is very, very common in the forms that we build that have a lot of automation in them, because we may want to know what the value of a field is, right? If you've typed something into a field or you've selected something from a dropdown, that may make other fields on your form required or hidden or something like that. There's a couple of, these are the most common ones that we use. So there's a text kind of get method that sets or returns the text content of a selected element. HTML sets or returns the content of selected, including HTML markup. And then val. This is probably, I put them all on there, but the val is probably the one we use most often when we're dealing with fields, because we want to know what's in that field. So something typed into a field or selected from a drop-down or a radio button is the value. So this sets or returns, in this case, because it's the get content, the value of form fields. Okay, so the following example demonstrates how to get the value of an input field with the jQuery val method. Now, well, this part is an alert. This is part of jQuery and JavaScript. Pops up those annoying pop-up messages that we all know and love. So basically what I'm going to do is when I click the button, a pop-up message is going to come up and it's going to say value, : and then the actual value of what's in the element called test. Oh boy. Okay, so let me type something in here. I'm gonna pick on Roger because he's my buddy. So when I click on the button, okay, get my pop-up message, and it has retrieved whatever was typed into the field. Now, in practical terms, this doesn't do much for us for our forms. Meant to illustrate, at some point now you're going to build onto this and do some sort of conditional. If the value of the field equals Roger, then do this. If the value of the field equals Vishal, do that. Okay. But that's how you get the value, by basically pointing to the field in question with either, in this case with an ID selector, and then saying .val, and that just returns the value. See all that. Okay, so basically I have an input tag with an ID of test, and then a button. Okay. And once again, I know I'm overemphasizing this, but because we, in a normal, just using JavaScript without jQuery, I'd have to put on this button, onClick equals the name of my function. But because I'm using jQuery and I've got this document ready function, it's basically always listening. It's just there waiting for you to click that button. That's what it does. Okay, so you can use the same three methods for setting content. So that last one was show me what's in there. The next one is now I want to put something into a field programmatically. So I'm sure everyone in here trusts their users to do the right thing all the time, right? But we all know that sometimes users can really make a mess of things. So we sometimes put functions into our forms where they click a button and we automatically put a value into a field. Or we select something for them because a certain percentage of them might do the wrong thing. Okay? So setting content, and it's the same three text, HTML, and val. Again, val is used probably more than the other two. Now, there's some key differences in the previous example. So before we did JQ #test.val, and you'll notice val was followed by open and close parentheses, and those are required. You have to put those in there. If you leave those blank, that's actually the signal to jQuery to return the value. If you put something in it, though, like I have here, that is the trigger to set a value. Okay? So basically, on my next example, when I click the button, Mickey Mouse will appear within the field. Oh. Okay, so in this case, the field might be read-only. We don't even want them typing in. We're going to set the value automatically. And there we have Mickey Mouse. Okay, the code on that one, it's the same HTML as the previous example, except that I'm setting the value as opposed to retrieving.
So we can get the value from the different fields too. That it's a readable val analysis, right? So for example, if I want to display the current user,
Yes.
by clicking that value, so I can put this MasterControl dot the keyword for already.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of the great question, for those of you who didn't hear it, so keyword fields are important tools when building our forms. Most of them are sort of meant to actually be hidden from the user. The stuff for data structures and some other things, obviously, those are meant for user interaction, but a vast majority of the keywords we kind of hide. And so Vishal brings up a great example of how you could use that. And you can grab the value of a user field, for example, on a keyword user field or the originator. And then you could put that in another field or pop up a message or whatever you want to do with it, even if it's a hidden field. Okay, get attributes. Now, occasionally use this one, but not a great deal. I thought it was interesting to include, though. So an attribute, what an attribute is when you're looking at a DOM element like an input tag, those have lots of attributes. So, for example, the ID, that's considered an attribute. The title, does everybody know what the title attribute in HTML does? Pops up the little tooltips. So when you hover over the field, little thing pops up and you can put like a description. Many customers have me put instructions, for example, on what goes in that field. That's the title's an attribute. So there's several attributes, and you may want to grab an attribute from one of your fields, and that's something that usually when you're looking at the web page nobody sees. It's all in the code, but there's a way to get an attribute. And you can also use this to, so here's some of the others that I mentioned. You can also use this to as a selector, actually, right? You can say everything with a certain attribute, do this too. So that's another way to, as a selector. Okay, so following example, this demonstrates how to get the value of an input field with the jQuery val method. Oh, wait. Did I copy and paste and not update my example? Okay, yeah, this doesn't use the val. This uses attribute. Okay, so for example, what I did in this example is I put a link on the form, a hyperlink, and we all know what a hyperlink is. You click on it and it takes us to some web page. But the user doesn't always know what the link is because the text that's shown might say click here, not www.yahoo.com or something. So with my jQuery, what I can do is I can read the attribute that's href, which is where you put in a link on your code there. So I've got an ID called myLink, and when I click the button, it's going to show me the actual URL to whatever I'm linking to. Okay, so google.com is the link on that, and I use that using the attribute. So I could also get the title, or I could get the ID. Again, in practical terms, we don't do this too often, but in some of our more complex forms, there's sometimes a need to do that. Oh, did I duplicate a slide? Looks like I did. Okay. Master control keywords. So we all should know what a master control keyword is. These are fields that you can create, give them a specific ID, and it populates usually some data for master control. So mastercontrol.form.number gives us the number of the form. There's a little bit of an issue with using keywords in jQuery because those dots, because jQuery itself has a lot of dots in it, those dots can sometimes cause problems when we're calling them out. So when you're using a master, so here's an example. So this first example won't work because these dots in mastercontrol.form.department cause jQuery to kind of wig out. So instead, what you have to do is escape the dots, and you precede those with 2 backslashes. So that says to jQuery, hey, this isn't like a dot click, this is a string of text. And there's my keyword. Okay? So these are things we run into with master control, little quirks.
Now, can you set variables up with the master control keywords and just use reference outs, and then you don't have to document?
Yeah. Well, oh, you can't?
Even if the value,
If you set a variable to the keyword, you do have to escape the dots.
You still have to escape the dots. Yes, I'm sorry.
but you do that, you can do it in the variable, you don't have to do it.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, there's actually one more way to do it too. If you do the document.getID, however it is, I don't remember what it is, then you can, what I did is I actually made a little form, I said getID, then put whatever I passed it into a variable that's the document getID.
Okay.
And then if you just call that function inside of the jQuery selector, it'll bring back the document getID. And that works. It's just one of the options for jQuery selector.
So what you're really doing is you're sort of mixing regular JavaScript with jQuery, which is totally possible. There's no problem at all with mixing the two. Okay. Okay, so jQuery manipulating CSS. So again, CSS, for those who may not be very familiar with it, it stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's used primarily for making our forms look pretty. Deals with font color, font size, width of fields, everything that would make your form look nice. And jQuery can manipulate that as well. In fact, we do a lot of this with some of our more complex forms when, again, a selection or clicking a button. Here's a great example, and I wonder if, I can't remember what my example looks like, but the most practical example I can think of is your fields, the solution packages, if any of you have used that. You have fields that are, the labels are black, and then if you do something that makes it required, that label changes from black to red. Well, that's actually changing the CSS of that field. All right, so there's several methods for CSS manipulation. There's one called add class. Okay, so again, if you created a class, so in that previous example, I'd have a class that would make my font black, and I'd have a separate class for making it red. And you essentially add and remove the appropriate class depending on whatever triggered that decision. You can also toggle class. And then .css. Now, I wanted to show you this just so you could see how it's done, but in all honesty, this is kind of the hard way to do it. The add class option is way easier, but I at least wanted you to see this. So you can take everything that we've learned up till now. So you can do the .click function and then do CSS. And in this case, it's property name, comma, value. So one of the property names would be color. You're changing the font color. So this would say color, and then this is usually, do you have to use hex?
You don't have to use the predefined color names.
Okay.
Red, yellow, whatever.
So there are some predefined color names if you need something, like fuchsia or something. You probably have to use the hexadecimal code or something like that. Okay? Now, and then there's also the ability to assign multiple CSS properties using the CSS method, and it looks more like this. Now, again, you can do it this way, but in my personal opinion, that's the hard way. It would be better to establish a class in your CSS and then just use the add or remove class function to do that. So that's my example does that because I want to use my preferred way, I guess. And oh yeah, I'm doing exactly what I said. So we see this in a lot of our forms. Is a kappa required? When I select yes, kappa now becomes red. And then you'd also have to make the field itself required because CSS just handles the label. It does not make the field itself required. And then, of course, I've got the opposite. So if I click no, it goes back to black. So again, to me, this becomes very powerful. Again, if you've got a whole section or a table or a lot of fields on your form and you want to do something you want to affect all of them with the click of a button or a choice from a drop-down, this CSS manipulation works really nicely. So jQuery resources. Like I said, we don't have a lot of time to cover everything that you can do with jQuery. And so here are some sites that I found that looked like they had some pretty good information. jQuery.com, obviously the main official site, has the libraries for download, all the documentation, and there are some tutorials available. W3 Schools, popular site for all things sort of web development based, has tutorials and references as well. And I find if you're new, W3 Schools really kind of dumbs it down for you. Whereas jQuery.com assumes you have a pretty decent jQuery base. So if you don't have that, you might want to hit W3 Schools first. I'll just admit a lot of the stuff in my slideshow came from there. Webdesignerwall.com, it's a blog. It's got a lot of contributions from the web designing community, lots of examples, things like that. And then this one was pretty cool, blog.themeforest.net. It had a 15-session web series. Guy put together some videos. They're all 6 to 10 minutes long or so. It just does examples of, practical applications of jQuery. And of course, there are 600 books available from Amazon or on your Kindle, if you have one. Not sure about Nook or iBooks. I only check Amazon. So lots of stuff out there. Again, if you're interested in a class, I'd love to get some feedback on that, and maybe we can do something next year. Well, thank you for your attendance. I appreciate your time.